The quorum being present, the Committee on Homeland Security will come to order. Committee is meeting today for the consideration of H.R. 3875, the Department of Homeland Security CBRNE Defense Act of 2015, H.R. 2795, the First Responder Identification of Emergency Needs in Disaster Situations, or FRIENDS Act, H.R. 3859, the HSA Technical Corrections Act, H.R. 3842, the Federal Law Enforcement Training Centers Reform and Improvement Act of 2015, H.R. 2285, the Prevent Trafficking in Cultural Property Act, H.R. 3869, the State and Local Cyber Protection Act of 2015, and H.R. 3878, the Strengthening Cybersecurity Information Sharing and Coordination in Our Ports Act of 2015. I now recognize myself for a very brief opening statement. I do have a longer statement that will appear in the record. Let me say I'm proud of the work this committee has done in this year. In this era of constant and evolving threats, we need to work together to strengthen the security of the homeland. We must do this with a common sense of purpose and with one voice. Almost all the work we've done this year has been accomplished in a bipartisan manner, which I'm very proud of in this day and age in Congress, and which I believe has been one of the keys to our success in this committee. For this, I thank everybody in the committee, and especially the ranking member for his partnership. As of yesterday, we passed 48 bills out of this committee, 22 from freshman members, 37 of these have passed the full House, and 7 have become law, accounting for 10% of all public laws this year. And 5 of these public laws were authored by freshmen on this committee. These are achievements to be proud of, but our work is not done. And I look forward to working with the ranking member in our markup today and throughout next year to strengthen the homeland through our oversight and legislative efforts. Today, I hope that we will continue that bipartisan work and send these bills to the House floor. These bills will strengthen our cybersecurity defenses, assist our first responders, prevent trafficking of cultural property, update the Homeland Security Act, and strengthen our defenses against weapons of mass destruction. Collectively, they represent another series of bills that will hopefully make it to the President's desk and, when enacted, help protect the American people from our enemies. Again, I want to thank all the members and the staff for their hard work on these bills and look forward to a productive markup. Chair now recognizes the ranking member.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I will likewise submit for the record the extended opening statement. However, let me indicate, too, I am encouraged by the ability of this committee to do its work in spite of other committees that fail to do so. And it's a tribute to your chairmanship and leadership, but it's also a recognition by the members of this committee that our job to keep America safe is a precious mission, and that in that spirit, all our members accept it wisely. Today, as you indicated, we will do 7 bills. Those 7 bills go from the gentle ladies from Texas FRIENDS Act, which is to enhance our understanding of how to support our first responders. Your bill, which is to assist DHS in its organizing effort to carry out the countering improvised explosive devices. Let me also indicate that other members, gentle lady from California, Ms. Torres, has H.R. 3875 today, dealing with coordination in our Ports Act of 2015. She has the Port of Long Beach in her district. It's very vital to the economy of the area, and we're happy that the committee saw fit to do so. Mr. Keating has a bill, H.R. 2285, Prevent Trafficking of Cultural Properties Act. All of us have seen the wanton destruction ISIL is doing on artifacts as it rape and pillage both Syria and Iraq at this point. So hopefully we can mitigate some of that so it won't become a continuous problem. So I'm happy to indicate the cooperation that you and your staff have shown, the minority members of this committee and the staff, and I yield back.
I thank the ranking member, and other members are reminded their opening statements may be submitted for the record. By agreement between the chair and the ranking member of the committee, by unanimous consent, shall use an amendment roster today.
Mr. Chairman.
Ranking member is recognized.
Reserving a right to object, and I will not object, would the chair please explain our agreement regarding the amendment roster? I yield to the chairman.
I thank the gentleman and all committee members for agreeing to the use of this amendment roster. We've agreed that the bills be open to amendment at any point and that we shall take up amendments in the order listed on the roster. The chair will allow members to offer amendments listed on the roster out of order to the extent practicable and in a manner not prohibited by the House or committee rules. Amendments not listed on the roster may be considered at the conclusion of the consideration of the roster. Chair would also note that there's a bipartisan agreement on many of these amendments, and members may be permitted to offer their amendments en bloc.
Thank the chair for this explanation and withdraw my reservation.
I thank the ranking member for that. I now call up H.R. 3875, the Department of Homeland Security, CBRNE Defense Act of 2015. Bill was circulated in advance. Printed copies are available. Clerk shall designate the bill.
H.R. 3875.
Without objection, the first reading is dispensed with, and the bill is considered read and open to amendment at any point. I have an amendment in the nature of a substitute based listed on the roster. The clerk shall report the amendment.
Amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.R. 3875, offered by Mr. McCaul.
Without objection, the reading is dispensed with. The amendment in the nature of a substitute shall be considered base text for purposes of amendment. The amendment in the nature of a substitute was noticed to committee members in compliance with the rules. I recognize myself for 5 minutes to explain this amendment. Departments and agencies across the United States government have centralized their weapons of mass destruction programs to provide clear focal points for dealing with this threat. Within the Department of Homeland Security, however, leadership, expertise, personnel, and resources related to chemical, biological, radiological, nuclear, and explosive threats are dispersed across numerous organizations within DHS headquarters. This dispersal has resulted in unclear assignment of responsibilities, suboptimal engagement with federal interagency partners and external stakeholders on CBRNE issues, and ineffective oversight and execution of major acquisitions involving these programs. This amendment in the nature of a substitute to the Department of Homeland Security CBRNE Defense Act of 2015 is a result of many years of oversight by this committee on the department's management of weapons of mass destruction. As members heard from Governor Ridge and Senator Lieberman yesterday, centralized leadership is necessary to ensure coordination and unity of effort in the biodefense space. That recommendation also rings true for chemical, radiological, nuclear, and explosive efforts. The bill before us today does just that by consolidating the offices within DHS headquarters with responsibility for CBRNE. We will ensure better coordination both within the department and interagency. This ANS elevates and streamlines DHS's efforts to address these threats and counter weapons of mass destruction. This amendment authorizes the CBRNE office led by a presidentially appointed assistant secretary. The bill directs the secretary to consolidate a number of offices and functions of DHS headquarters within the new office and provides needed structure for the management of these activities. According to the department, the reorganization mandated by this bill has the potential to provide cost savings through consolidation of physical space associated with the reorg, as well as other efficiencies that may lead to lower cost, higher output, and improved quality. One such efficiency is better acquisition discipline across the CBRNE-related acquisition programs. I urge my colleagues to support this amendment. Is there any further discussion on the amendment in the nature of a substitute? I read that about as fast as I could.
Mr. Chairman.
I know everybody's schedule is the lay from Texas is recognized.
Chairman, I'll comment very briefly on this legislation. First, I want to thank you and the ranking member for your opening remarks regarding the bipartisanship of this committee. I rise in support of the amendment in nature of a substitute, and subsequently Mr. Thompson's amendment that will be forthcoming, H.R. 385, and very pleased to work with you on this issue. This bill authorizes an Office of Chemical, Biological, Radiological, Nuclear, and Explosives Defense within the Department of Homeland Security. And it is clear that departments and agencies across the U.S. government have centralized their weapons of mass destruction defense programs to provide clear focal points for dealing with this threat. We cannot lessen this threat and its impact to the American people, and the importance of the Homeland Security Department and those of us who deal with these issues are being organized and directed. I also want to appreciate the committee's interest in my bill, H.R. 85, Terrorism Prevention and Critical Infrastructure Protection, and I'd like to join both you and Mr. Thompson in being concerned about securing our nation's critical infrastructure from terrorist threats as a top national Homeland Security priority. I share your understanding regarding how important it is to draft legislation that addresses the cyber threat posed by computer viruses and worms designed to destroy or cripple industrial systems that sustain critical infrastructure in a serious challenge. I would add to this list of security concerns the physical security of critical infrastructure as something the committee should address because of the internet tools that are available to remotely plan physical terrorist threats. I ask, with that, I ask for the submission of two documents, H.R. 85 analysis and H.R. 85 at this time.
And without objection, sir.
And I yield back. Thank you so very much.
And I thank the gentlelady. Is there any further discussion on the amendment? There being no further discussion on the amendment, the committee will move to consideration of the amendments to the amendment in the nature of a substitute listed on the roster. Next is an amendment to the amendment in the nature of a substitute offered by the gentleman from Mississippi, Mr. Thompson. Would the gentleman like to offer his amendment?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment listed on the roster, and I ask for its consideration at this time.
The clerk shall report the amendment.
Amendment to the amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.R. 3875, offered by Mr. Thompson.
Without objection, the reading of the amendments dispensed with. Mr. Thompson is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, my amendment makes a number of changes to the underlying text with an eye toward ensuring that the department's chief medical officer can continue to be a leader within the department on public health and medical issues. This committee worked in a bipartisan manner in 2006 to authorize the chief medical officer's position to, among other things, serve as the principal advisor to the DHS secretary and FEMA administrator on medical and public health issues. My amendment would preserve this key advisory role even as the chief medical officer's budget, personnel, and resources get folded into the new office. Moreover, it allows for the establishment of a health division within the new office, which could serve as a base of operation for the chief medical officer's public health activities. Finally, I'd highlight that my amendment includes language underscoring my belief that a far more likely outcome than this reorganization generating cost savings is that it will necessitate new expenditure, particularly the provision of retention bonuses to highly skilled, much sought after nuclear and biodefense experts who otherwise would leave DHS because of their lowered position and reduced prospects for advancement. As a nation, we cannot afford to have focus and attention towards CBRN missions diminished as a result of unavoidable staff upheavals and infighting that comes with the reorganization of this order. With that, Mr. Chairman, I urge support of my amendment and yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Is there any further discussion on the amendment to the amendment in the nature of a substitute? There being no further discussion, the question now occurs on the amendment to the amendment in the nature of a substitute offered by Mr. Thompson. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed signify by saying no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, and the amendment to the amendment in the nature of a substitute is agreed to. There are no additional amendments listed on the roster. Are there any further amendments to the amendment in the nature of a substitute? There being no further amendments, the question now occurs on agreeing to the amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.R. 3875 as amended. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed signify by saying no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, and the amendment in the nature of a substitute as amended is agreed to. Question now occurs on reporting H.R. 3875 as amended to the House with a favorable recommendation. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed signify by saying no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, and the motion is agreed to. Without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table, and staff is authorized to make any technical and conforming changes. I now call up H.R. 2795, the First Responder Identification of Emergency Needs in Disaster Situation, or FRIENDS Act, and discharge the Subcommittee on Emergency Preparedness, Response, and Communications from further consideration. Bill was circulated. Clerk shall designate the bill.
H.R. 2795.
Without objection, the first reading is dispensed with. Bill is considered read and open to amendment at any point. Listed first on the roster is an amendment in the nature of a substitute offered by the gentlelady from Texas, Ms. Jackson Lee. Does the gentlelady wish to offer her amendment?
Mr. Chairman, yes, I do.
Clerk shall report the amendment.
Amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.R. 2795, offered by Ms. Jackson Lee.
Without objection, the reading is dispensed with. The amendment in the nature of a substitute shall be considered base text for purposes of amendment. This amendment was noticed to committee members in compliance with the rules. Chair now recognizes the gentlelady from Texas.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I'm very pleased to have the committee support through the chairman and ranking member. And I want to thank our staffs for working so effectively together, and as well to the proponent of amendments that will be offered soon, but also to the ranking member, Mr. Payne of the Emergency Preparedness Committee, who was an original co-sponsor. Thank him certainly for his leadership. The FRIENDS Act embodies the important and fundamental idea that we have an obligation to ensure that first responders who protect our loved ones and our fellow citizens in emergencies have the peace of mind that comes from knowing that their loved ones are safe while they do their duty. These are their families. Maybe families that are scattered, but they are their families, and they will be away. This amendment, in the nature of a substitute to H.R. 2795, reflects stakeholder input and bipartisan collaboration with the majority, and I believe makes the underlying bill better. I appreciate the collaboration and cooperation of the minority staff, my staff, working together for improvements in this act. I also want to make mention of the International Association of Fire Chiefs, the National Association of State EMS Officials, and the International Emergency Management Society for their valuable assistance in input regarding the ANS. I hold in high regard the service of firefighters, law enforcement officers, emergency response technicians, nurses, emergency room doctors, and dozens of others. First responders are called to serve, and many times they leave immediately. And so this bill asks the Comptroller General for a comprehensive review of the range of policies and programs in place at the state level to address the preparedness and protection of first responders, and as well who delineate high-risk urban areas, and it is to delineate high-risk urban areas from rural areas, and as well to develop programs dealing with protecting their families. The reports focus on the presence of the family of the first responders in an area affected by a terrorist attack, and the availability of personal protective equipment is essential. This report will focus on the family as a critical factor that should be considered in the work of the first responders during time of crisis. Just as an example, as I conclude my remarks, two examples, of course, and I will submit into the record certain statements. Judge Jenkins, the Commissioner of Public, County Commissioner in Dallas County during the Ebola outbreak, was enormously concerned about first responders confronting the situation and them being concerned about their families and how they would impact their families. I remember very distinctly after 9/11 when many of the firefighters, and others, I should say, had families left behind without any knowledge of what had happened. In particular, there was something called latchkey children that were left behind, and no provisions for those individuals who possibly had lost first responders in this great tragedy. So I want to thank my colleagues for their support. I want to read just one sentence from the letter of the International Association of Fire Chiefs and ask unanimous consent to submit this letter into the record.
Without objection.
It says, on behalf of the nearly 11,000 fire service leaders of the International Association of Fire Chiefs, I would like to thank you for introducing the substitute amendment to this bill, H.R. 2795, and that IAFC supports this legislation because it would examine an important issue facing the nation's fire responders during a major terrorist attack adequate preparedness for the first responders' families. As I said, I asked unanimous consent for that letter. I asked that unanimous consent for the letter for the National Association of State EMS Officials, NPR article on the Dallas judge, county judge, and an article entitled Katrina's First Responders Risked All to Save Others. I ask unanimous consent for signature.
Without objection, so ordered.
With that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
I thank the gentlelady. Is there any further discussion on the amendment? Let me say I'm very supportive. I appreciate the gentlelady bringing this good legislation forward. There being no further discussion, the committee will move to consideration of the amendments to the amendment in the nature of a substitute listed on the roster. Next on the roster is an amendment to the amendment in the nature of a substitute offered by the gentleman from New York, Mr. Higgins. Would the gentleman like to offer his amendment?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I have two amendments at the desk and ask for unanimous consent that they be considered in block.
And without objection, so ordered, the clerk shall report the en bloc amendment.
En bloc amendment to the amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.R. 2795, offered by Mr. Higgins.
Without objection, the reading is dispensed with. Mr. Higgins is recognized for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, before I begin, I'd like to commend Congresswoman Jackson Lee on her efforts to help ensure that first responder families are cared for when their loved ones are called away to respond to a natural disaster or terrorist attack. Mr. Chairman, my en bloc amendment, which is supported by the International Association of Fire Chiefs, would make two improvements to the bill. First, it would direct the Comptroller General to examine local policies related to supporting first responder families. Second, it would direct the Comptroller General to assess whether and how the availability of home med kits for first responders and their families would enhance their ability to respond to a biological attack. These amendments will help ensure that the full spectrum of policies to support first responders and their families are reviewed and facilitate the sharing of best practices. I encourage the committee to support my amendment, and once again, I congratulate Congresswoman Jackson Lee on the FRIENDS Act. Yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back. Is there any further discussion on the en bloc amendment to the amendment in the nature of a substitute?
Chairman.
The gentlelady from Texas is recognized.
Just let me thank the gentleman for offering, I think, these very constructive amendments, and thank the International Association of Fire Chiefs for their input. These are important elements of including the local community, and the med kits are extremely important. I thank the gentleman for offering them. With that, Mr. Chairman, I support the amendments en bloc, and I yield back.
Thank the gentlelady. Any further discussion on the amendment? There being no further discussion, the question now occurs on the en bloc amendment to the amendment in the nature of a substitute offered by Mr. Higgins. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed signify by saying no. The opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The en bloc amendment to the amendment in the nature of a substitute is agreed to. There are no additional amendments listed on the roster. Are there any further amendments to the amendment in the nature of a substitute? There being no further amendments, the question now occurs on agreeing to the amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.R. 2795 as amended. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed signify by saying no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The amendment in the nature of a substitute as amended is agreed to. The question now occurs on reporting H.R. 2795 as amended to the House with a favorable recommendation. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed signify by saying no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, and the motion is agreed to. And without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. Staff is authorized to make any technical and conforming changes. I now call up H.R. 3859, the HSA Technical Corrections Act. The bill was circulated in advance. The clerk shall designate the bill.
H.R. 3859.
Without objection, the reading is dispensed with. The bill is considered read and open to amendment at any point. Does any member wish to be recognized on the bill? There being no further discussion of the bill, the committee will move to consideration of amendments. There are no amendments listed on the roster. Are there any amendments to the bill? There being no amendments, the question now occurs on agreeing to the bill, H.R. 3859. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed signify by saying no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The bill is agreed to. Question now occurs on reporting the bill, H.R. 3859, to the House with a favorable recommendation. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed signify by saying no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The motion is agreed to. Without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. The chair now calls up H.R. 3842, the Federal Law Enforcement Training Centers Reform and Improvement Act of 2015, The bill was circulated in advance. The clerk shall designate the bill.
H.R. 3842.
Without objection, the reading is dispensed with. The bill is considered read and open to amendment at any point. Chair now recognizes the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Carter, for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, since its creation in the 1970s, the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center has provided high-quality, cost-effective, standardized training for federal law enforcement training officers across multiple agencies. Since FLETC's creation, Congress has given the director of FLETC only limited direction to ensure high-quality training is seamlessly conducted. H.R. 3842 codifies into law important authorities given to the director of FLETC. By enacting these authorities into law, Congress will ensure that FLETC remains the preeminent center in the nation for training federal law enforcement. I would like to thank the chairman for considering this measure, and I would like to thank the gentlelady from California, Representative Torres, for co-sponsoring this bipartisan bill. And I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Is there any further discussion on the bill? Ms. Torres is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman McCaul and Ranking Member Thompson, for the opportunity to present before this committee. It's been a pleasure working with my committee colleague, Mr. Carter of Georgia. Very simply, this bill codifies the department's federal law enforcement training centers, also known as FLETC. FLETC serves a critical role in the United States Homeland Security mission by providing basic and advanced law enforcement training to federal, state, local, and international law enforcement officials. FLETC trains more than 70,000 law enforcement officers each year, in seven locations across the country, one of them very near the port of Los Angeles, which services my district. FLETC has a fantastic partnership with the Maritime Law Enforcement Training Center, which has led to the development of training standards and strategies for the protection of America's ports and waterways. This partnership also provides our law enforcement officials with access to a premier maritime training facility and provides training opportunities for federal, state, local, tribal law enforcement agencies. The bill will ensure FLETC training centers, the valuable training assistance they provide to law enforcement across the country, will continue to operate and provide the training our law enforcement officers need to keep us safe. I urge my colleagues to support this very important piece of legislation.
Gentlelady yields back. Is there any further discussion on the bill? There being no further discussion of the bill, the committee will move to consideration of amendments on the roster. Listed first on the roster is an amendment offered by the gentlelady from New Jersey, Mrs. Watson Coleman. Would the gentlelady like to offer her amendment?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have 3 amendments at the desk and ask unanimous consent that they be considered en bloc.
Without objections to order, the clerk shall report the en bloc amendment.
En bloc amendment to H.R. 3842, offered by Mrs. Watson Coleman.
Without objection, the reading is dispensed with. Mrs. Watson Coleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, my first amendment adds acquisition management to the core responsibilities for the director of FLETC. It brings H.R. 3842 in line with the DHS Headquarters and Acquisitions Bill that the committee approved last month, H.R. 3572. My amendment would ensure that the director is required to administer acquisition activities in accordance with the departmental management directives and applicable federal laws and regulations. As such, the director would be required to evaluate the past performance of contractors, including whether the company demonstrated integrity and business ethics. The director would also be responsible for ensuring that a fair portion of contracting dollars are awarded to small businesses. My second amendment authorizes FLETC to work with MPPD to make training available to security professionals in the private sector, particularly those involved with protecting critical infrastructure. In June, the center successfully hosted its first ever FLETC Private-Public Partnership Academy, a 2-day training event that brought together public and private sector stakeholders. And finally, my third amendment authorizes the director to detail FLETC employees to various components in the department to assist in the development of critical department programs and initiatives. Prior to today, FLETC has, on occasion, detailed staff to departmental efforts, and I understand that these detailees have made meaningful contributions to the DHS Blue campaign to combat Human Trafficking, as well as Department's Unaccompanied Alien Children Working Group. I urge my colleagues to support my en bloc amendments, and I yield back the balance of my time. Thank you.
Gentlelady yields back. Is there any further discussion on the en bloc amendment? There being no further discussion, the question now occurs on the en bloc amendment offered by Mrs. Watson Coleman. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed signify by saying no. The opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, and the en bloc amendment is agreed to. Listed next on the roster is an amendment offered by the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Loudermilk. Would the gentleman like to offer his amendment?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I have 3 amendments at the desk and ask unanimous consent that they be considered en bloc.
Without objection, so ordered. The clerk shall report the en bloc amendment.
En bloc amendment to H.R. 3842, offered by Mr. Loudermilk.
Without objection, the reading is dispensed with. Mr. Loudermilk is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My en bloc amendment enhances a few parts of this already great bill. It ensures that FLETC collaborates with other agencies on international training and instruction. It makes technical corrections to the base text, and it authorizes FLETC to honor and memorialize fallen FLETC graduates each year because those that have made the ultimate sacrifice in the line of duty should always be honored and remembered. I support the en bloc amendment and ask my colleagues to do the same. I'm proud of my colleague, the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Carter, for introducing this important piece of legislation, and I now yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Is there any further discussion on the en bloc amendment?
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Katko is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The Federal Law Enforcement Training Center remains vital in ensuring that our federal law enforcement officers have the best training available. Mr. Loudermilk's amendment will allow international strategic partners to continue participating in training exercises at FLETC. In my home state of New York, we rely on cooperation with our international partners, specifically the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, to help combat the increasing drug epidemic and alien trafficking epidemic along the northern border. Training with our Canadian counterparts remains a pivotal piece of our Homeland Security posture. International cooperation between our 2 nations can be epitomized by ShipRider and the IBET programs. ShipRider allows RCMP personnel to conduct interdiction missions on Coast Guard vessels and Coast Guard-sponsored personnel to interdict on RCMP vessels. This particular international strategic partnership allows RCMP officials to undergo joint training with Coast Guard personnel at FLETC's Maritime Law Enforcement Training Center in Charleston, South Carolina. The Integrated Border Enforcement Team, otherwise known as IBET, is also crucial for general awareness between our 2 nations as we continue to fight the trafficking of drugs like heroin into our communities. I was pleased to offer an amendment authorizing IBET in the recent border security bill, H.R. 3586. My home district, specifically Onondaga County, is classified as a high-intensity drug trafficking area, and we rely on cooperation with our Canadian counterparts to help stem the flow of drugs into my community. I work closely with my colleague, Mr. Loudermilk, in a bipartisan task force on combating terrorists and foreign travel. His work, no doubt, makes this country safer, and I would like to thank the member from Georgia for his leadership on this issue and yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back. Is there any further discussion on the en bloc amendment? There being no further discussion, the question now occurs on the en bloc amendment offered by Mr. Loudermilk. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed signify by saying no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, and the en bloc amendment is agreed to. There are no additional amendments listed on the roster. Are there any further amendments to the bill? There being no further amendments, the question now occurs on agreeing to the bill H.R. 3842 as amended. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed signify by saying no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The bill as amended is agreed to. Question now occurs on reporting the bill H.R. 3842 to the House with a favorable recommendation. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed signify by saying no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, and the motion is agreed to. Without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table, and staff is authorized to make any technical and conforming changes. I now call up H.R. 2285, the Prevent Trafficking and Cultural Property Act, and discharge the Subcommittee on Border and Maritime Security from further consideration. The bill was circulated and advanced, and the clerk shall designate the bill.
H.R. 2285.
Without objection, the reading is dispensed with. The bill is considered read and open to amendment at any point. Listed first on the roster is an amendment in the nature of a substitute offered by the gentleman from Massachusetts, Mr. Keating. Does the gentleman wish to offer his amendment?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I do have an amendment at the roster.
The clerk shall report the amendment.
Amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.R. 2285, offered by Mr. Keating.
Without objection, the reading is dispensed with, and the amendment in the nature of a substitute shall be considered base text for purposes of amendment. This amendment was noticed to committee members in compliance with the rules. Chair now recognizes the gentleman from Massachusetts for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The amendment, in the nature of a substitute I'm offering, makes only minor technical changes, punctuation, some word changes to be consistent with existing law, to H.R. 2285, the Prevent Trafficking in Cultural Property Act. This bipartisan bill is aimed at stopping ISIL and other terrorist groups from financing their activities through the sale of stolen antiquities and other cultural property. ISIL in particular is directly involved in the looting of archaeological sites in Iraq and in Syria, theft from regional museums, and the stockpiling of cultural objects for future sale on the international market. To date, ISIL has reportedly earned tens of millions of dollars from antiquities stolen in Syria alone. In addition to working to prevent the theft and destruction of antiquities in countries like Iraq and Syria, we also need to do more here at home to ensure that the United States isn't importing stolen antiquities and financing terrorism as a result of this. The bill would enhance coordination and training within the Department of Homeland Security to stop stolen antiquities from entering the United States, and even more importantly, to investigate, enhance prosecution, disrupt and dismantle the smuggling and trafficking networks that facilitate this illicit trade. It directs the Office of Customs and Border Protection and the Immigration and Customs Enforcement to designate a principal coordinator to lead enforcement efforts against trafficking in cultural property, revise policies and procedures to ensure coordination between CBP and ICE in working to prevent trafficking in cultural property, and to emphasize investigations of trafficking networks, including smugglers, dealers, buyers, money launderers, and other facilitators, and support the prosecution of these criminals. Personnel will receive sufficient training in identifying cultural property at the greatest risk of looting and in techniques specifically related to illegal trade in cultural property. The bill would help cut off an important revenue stream for ISIL, the second greatest revenue stream that they have after oil, and by working to close the illicit antiquities markets in the United States. This would ultimately reduce the incentive for individuals in Iraq and Syria to loot and steal antiquities in the first place. I'd like to thank the chairman, Mr. McCaul, for being an original co-sponsor of this bill, and other members of this committee for their co-sponsorships, including Representative Langevin, Representative Higgins, Representative Katko, Representative Bartlett. And I urge the support for this important and timely legislation. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Is there any further discussion on the amendment and the nature of substitute? Mr. Katko is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to echo what Mr. Keating said and give a real-life example. One of the last cases I did as a federal prosecutor was an antiquities case. And 10,000 tablets were recovered from Cornell University that were stolen from Iraq and sold on a black market for tens of millions of dollars. And these things were the very history of Iraq, written down in tablet form. And they were stolen from Iraq. So it's a real issue, and this bill is a very important bill, and it's a really important way to cut off a prime source of funding. And it's happening in the United States on a regular basis. All those tablets ultimately were returned to the Iraqi government, but there's an awful lot of history that's being stolen from those countries and sold in this manner. And this is a great bill, and it's very important. So I applaud you for bringing it.
Gentleman yields. Any further discussion on the amendment? Let me just say, I want to thank the gentleman for bringing this legislation forward. I was an original co-sponsor and proud to be so. We look at what ISIS is doing, not only human tragedy, but the destruction of these antiquities is one of the more horrific chapters in what's going on over there. Anything that we can do to stop this, not to mention, as Mr. Keating said, the financing of their terror operations coming from the defacing and destruction of these antiquities. If we can do anything to choke off this terrorist financing, I think that's a step in the right direction. I want to thank the gentleman for bringing this forward, and I was proud to support it. There being no further discussion of the amendment and the nature of substitute, the committee will move to consideration of amendments to the amendment and the nature of substitute. There are no amendments listed on the roster. Are there any amendments to the amendment in the nature of substitute? There being no amendments, the question now occurs on agreeing to the amendment in the nature of substitute to H.R. 2285. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed signify by saying no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The amendment in the nature of substitute is agreed to. Question now occurs on reporting H.R. 2285 as amended to the House with a favorable recommendation. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed signify by saying no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, and the motion is agreed to. Without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. Staff is authorized to make any technical and conforming changes. I now call up H.R. 3869, the State and Local Cyber Protection Act of 2015. The bill was circulated in advance. Printed copies are available. Clerk shall designate the bill.
H.R. 3869.
Without objection, the reading is dispensed with. The bill is considered read and open to amendments at any point. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Hurd, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In the cybersecurity realm, state and local governments often do not have access to the same personnel or technical capabilities that the federal government does. My bill, H.R. 3869, the State and Local Cyber Protection Act, will help resolve this issue. This bill would allow state and local governments access to the assistance, training, and tools voluntarily and upon request that are required to secure our nation's information systems at every level. As the federal lead on cybersecurity, the Department of Homeland Security should play an integral role in working with state and local governments. Their information systems host a wide range of sensitive PII and critical infrastructure data, making them especially attractive targets for cyber attacks. Additionally, H.R. 3869 will allow state and local governments unprecedented access to the vulnerability assessments and application tools that the NCIC has at their disposal. By establishing the relationship between DHS and state and local governments in this bill, we are advocating and allowing the continued development of cyber protection for our state and local governments. Lastly, the State and Local Cyber Protection Act would require the NCIC to seek feedback from state and local governments once the law is implemented and voluntary assistance has begun, in order to gauge the effectiveness of these efforts and ensure that progress is being made. I thank my colleague, Mr. Ratcliffe from Texas, for his support on this legislation, and I urge my colleagues to do the same.
Gentleman yields back. Is there any further discussion on the bill? Mr. Richmond is recognized.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to be recognized.
But a general
if there's time
reminder.
for a colloquy.
I recognize Mr. Richmond.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This bill directs the department through the National Cybersecurity and Communications Integration Center, NCIC, to assist state, local, and tribal governments by helping to identify vulnerabilities in their information networks, providing IT security training, and assisting with the deployment of technology to achieve a cyber posture capable of diagnosing and mitigating against cyber threats and vulnerabilities. Presently, DHS collaborates heavily with state and local stakeholders in its cybersecurity activities through the Multi-State Information Sharing Analysis Center, the CQ'd Voluntary Critical Infrastructure Program, the Cyber Resilience Review, the Enhanced Cybersecurity Services Program, the Continuous Diagnostics and Mitigation Program, the National Cyber Awareness System, the Cybersecurity Evaluation Tool, CSET, and the on-site cybersecurity consulting. I'm certain that there are jurisdictions all across this nation that could benefit from the assistance set forth in this legislation, particularly during these times of multiple and persistent cyber threats. I would appreciate hearing from the author of this legislation about how the bill envisions the NCIC carrying out these important operations, especially since no new resources are provided. I would now yield to the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Hurd, to answer that question.
Gentleman yields to gentleman from Texas.
I appreciate the gentleman from Louisiana highlighting the number of ways that the Department of Homeland Security is already working with state and local folks on this issue, which is even more reason the need for this legislation, which is intended to codify DHS's existing efforts and to make sure that our state and local partners recognize that Homeland Security is the belly button on all these issues. I know there's always concern of unfunded mandates, and talking with DHS on this, they do not believe this is an unfunded mandate, nor does CBO, because our men and women in DHS are already working very hard. So I share the gentleman from Louisiana's concerns, and as we had talked earlier today and shared with minority staff on these issues, that we're going to be cautious of these things and making sure that DHS, and everybody knows DHS, is the belly button for these things. And also at this time, like to ask unanimous consent to insert in the record letters from the National Association of Counties and the National Association of State Chief Information Officers. There are 2 letters in support of this bill.
Without objection, so ordered.
And they highlight, the need for this type of legislation and are supportive of what we're doing. And with that, I look forward to continuing working with my colleagues from Louisiana on these issues.
Mr. Chairman, I would thank Mr. Hurd for his explanation and note that it's a very critical bill. And as we talked earlier, we agreed that it is very necessary. And most of the things that they're doing, DHS is performing and they're doing well. But as I look through the bill and notice that we're giving them a specific 22 paragraphs of responsibilities, we just want to make sure that they had the resource to do it effectively, because I think we have done on this committee consistently is make sure that we put the security of the homeland at the forefront. And with that, I will thank the gentleman for continuing to commit to work through the process as the bill goes forward to make sure that we achieve both of our goals, which is to make sure that local and state police departments and others have the ability and the resources to make sure that the families in the United States are protected. So with that, I will yield back and thank the gentleman from Texas.
The gentleman yields back. Is there any further discussion on the bill? I have a brief question. Is belly button an operational term at the agency, the CIA? Okay.
Excuse me, Mr. Chairman. I
some
think it's a,
clarification on
Mr.
that.
Chairman, if I could, I think it's a naval term.
Nice. Any further discussion? There being no further well, I'd love to hear another. You can't top that. Can't top that one. There being no further discussion, the committee will move to consideration of the amendments. There are no amendments listed on the roster. Are there any amendments to the bill? There being no amendments, the question now occurs in agreeing to the bill H.R. 3869. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed signify by saying no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The bill is agreed to. Question now occurs on reporting the bill H.R. 3869 to the House with a favorable recommendation. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed signify by saying no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The motion is agreed to. Without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. This is our last bill. I now call up H.R. 3878, the Strengthening Cybersecurity Information Sharing and Coordination in Our Ports Act of 2015. The bill was circulated in advance. Clerk shall designate the bill.
H.R. 3878.
Without objection, the reading is dispensed with. The bill is considered read and open to amendment at any point listed first on the roster as an amendment in the nature of a substitute offered by the gentlelady from California, Ms. Torres. Does the gentlelady wish to offer her amendment?
Yes,
Ms.
Mr.
Torres.
Chairman.
Clerk shall report the amendment.
Amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.R. 3878.
Without objection, the reading is dispensed with. The amendment in the nature of a substitute shall be considered base text for purposes of amendment. This amendment was noticed to committee members in compliance with the rules. Chair now recognizes the gentlelady from California for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman McCaul. My legislation, H.R. 3878, would require DHS to make a more proactive approach to cybersecurity at ports and promote cybersecurity information sharing and coordination at ports. Specifically, my amendment in the nature of a substitute requires the Secretary of Homeland Security to develop and implement a maritime cybersecurity risk model to evaluate cybersecurity risks, ensure participation of at least one maritime community representative in the National Cybersecurity Communications and Integration Center, establish guidelines for voluntary reporting for cybersecurity risks and incidents, and require the National Maritime Security Advisory Committee to make recommendations to the Secretary on enhancing the sharing of cyber information. The ANS also requires the Commandant of the Coast Guard to direct the Maritime Security Committees to facilitate the sharing of cybersecurity information to address port-specific cyber risks and ensure that the area maritime security plans and facility security plans address cybersecurity risks and include mitigation plan. Together, these measures will help create an environment under which DHS, the Coast Guard, ports, and port stakeholders can work together to enhance cybersecurity at our nation's ports. In closing, I would like to thank Chairman McCaul and Subcommittee Chairman Miller for their cooperation in the bipartisan nature of the staff discussion on this bill. I urge your support.
Gentlelady yields back. Is there any further discussion on the amendment in the nature of substitute? There being no further discussion on the amendment, the committee will move forward to consideration of the amendments to the amendment in the nature of substitute listed on the roster. Next on the roster is an amendment to the amendment in the nature of substitute offered by the gentleman from New York, Mr. Donovan. Would the gentleman like to offer his amendment?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment listed on the roster and ask for its consideration at this time.
Clerk shall report the amendment.
Amendment to the amendment in the nature of substitute to H.R. 3878, offered by Mr. Donovan.
Without objection, the reading is dispensed with. Mr. Donovan is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mrs. Torres, for offering this important legislation that will improve security at our ports. The Maritime Transportation Security Act of 2002 requires vessels and port facilities to conduct vulnerability assessments and develop security plans for physical security, access controls, procedural security measures, and communication systems. This amendment will add cybersecurity to that list. The need for this amendment was highlighted last month during a hearing before the Border and Maritime Security Subcommittee on the topic of cybersecurity at our nation's ports. At that hearing, we heard of the growing reliance on computer technology at our ports, controlling everything from enormous cranes to completely automated terminals. We can only imagine the havoc that could be created throughout our economy if malicious actors, whether they be criminals, a foreign state, or terrorists, disrupt activities at a port such as New York, New Jersey, or Los Angeles, Long Beach. Last year, disruptions at West Coast ports, while unrelated to cybersecurity, cost the United States economy nearly $2 billion per day. Beyond the potential economic cost of our port disruptions, there are also security concerns. Already, we have seen criminal gangs who have conducted cyber attacks in Europe, specifically to smuggle illegal drugs past port authorities. The hackers were able to remotely control the terminal operating systems and release cargo to trucks without the port operators knowing about the missing cargo. If narcotics traffickers have attempted this tactic, surely the day is not far off when terrorists will see the potential to use a cyber attack as part of a larger plan to smuggle dangerous materials through our ports. This amendment makes a very small but important change to MTSA, making it crystal clear that the Coast Guard has the specific authority to require maritime vessels and facilities to incorporate cybersecurity into their assessments and plans. I urge my colleagues to support the amendment and the underlying measure, and I yield back my time.
Gentleman yields back. Is there any further discussion on the amendment in the nature of a substitute? There being no further discussion, the question now occurs on the amendment to the amendment in the nature of a substitute offered by Mr. Donovan. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed signify by saying no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The amendment to the amendment in the nature of substitutes agreed to. There are no additional amendments listed on the roster. Are there any further amendments to the amendment in the nature of a substitute? There being no further amendments, the question now occurs on agreeing to the amendment in the nature of substitute to H.R. 3878 as amended. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed signify by saying no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The amendment in the nature of a substitute as amended is agreed to. Question now occurs on reporting H.R. 3878 as amended to the House with a favorable recommendation. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed signify by saying no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, and the motion is agreed to. Without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table, and staff is authorized to make any technical and conforming changes. Okay. Mr. Katko is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, pursuant to Rule 22, Clause 1 of the Rules of the House, I move that the committee authorize the chairman to offer such motions as may be necessary in the House to go to conference with the Senate on the bills ordered reported by this committee today or on similar Senate bills.
Without objection, the motion is agreed to.
Mr. Chairman.
The ranking member is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, pursuant to House Rule 11, Clause 2L, I ask that members have 2 calendar days to file with the clerk of the committee supplemental, additional, or minority views on each of the bills ordered reported by the committee today.
Without objection, so ordered. There being no further business, I'd like to conclude by saying that with the passage now of 7 additional bills, we've passed 55 bills out of this committee, 22 from freshman members, 37 have passed the full House, 7 have become law, and that accounts for 10% of all public laws this year. 5 of these public laws authored by our freshman members, which I'm very proud as the chairman to make note of, to empower all members of this committee to have the opportunity to legislate. When I was a freshman, the only bill I got passed was a post office bill. And so, if I was lucky. So I'm proud of the work our freshman team has done, and quite frankly, all the members in a bipartisan manner. That's the way this Congress should work. And with that, this committee now stands adjourned.